Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another video from A Man Talks NRL SuperCoach, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the best centre wing options to be putting into your SuperCoach sides. Let's get into it. So the centre position is really interesting in that it'd be hard to justify having a lot of gun centre wing players to start the season, just given the price tags and I think the amount of value options that we've got in the mid-range and cheap category. But I thought it's still good to be starting to talk about some centre guns, because obviously there are some players out there who will be wanting to start with at least one. So starting off with David Nofoaluma, by far and away he was the best centre wing option in SuperCoach all of last season. Got absolutely burned by him. I was never able to get him into my side, and just waiting for his price to drop, and it just never happened. It was super frustrating. But like, he just had an amazing year. I think he scored 17 tries in that Tigers team that wasn't even that good. You can see his statistics are just ridiculous. He was averaging about 31 points in base alone, and to throw in his tackle breaking ability where he was getting on average about 26 points a game from that. You were looking at a floor of already 55 points from a centre, which is just ridiculous. And you just throw in all those tries that he scored. He was regularly getting above the 70 points average, often getting into the hundreds. And even towards the back end of the season, when the Tigers had a really tough run, he was still scoring in the 60s. He was still getting some try assists and just some little contributions every now and then. So he really was just a super consistent option. The thing for me for this season, though, I think 670k, he's priced obviously at his absolute max average, and the Tigers do have a tough start to the season. They verse the Raiders, the Roosters, the Knights and the Eels all in their first 4 games, followed by the Cowboys, which is an okay game, but then they've got the Rabbitohs straight after that. So the Tigers' draw to start the year is pretty tough. Now again, obviously we saw at the end of last year, Nofoaluma can score against anyone and the opposition sometimes doesn't matter. But we did see a little drop off in his points when he was versing those tougher opponents. We saw in his last 3 games against the Rabbitohs, the Storm and the Eels, all good defensive teams last season, he scored around 60, 25 and 53. So again, obviously not bad, but just not what just not in comparison to what he was scoring earlier in the season. So I think again, it's for Nofoaluma, I think he's just too expensive for me to start the season with, but I think he's definitely going to be a player I'm going to be wanting to get into my team at some point during the season. I'm banking on that he just doesn't do well in the first few games when it's really they've got tough games. Hopefully he drops in price, and that would be the ideal situation, but it didn't work out for me last year. So I think, if you're hellbent on getting him to start the season, obviously I can't discourage that because he's an amazing player. But for me, I think he's just too expensive to justify having at the start of the season. So I just don't think I'm going to be going there. But undeniable, those stats and his, the way he plays with his offloading tackle breaking ability, he's just made for SuperCoach. But yeah, for me, not to start the season. So we'll move on to Daniel Tupou. So 627k, he had a really good end to the season. He was averaging 71 points. And similar to Nofoaluma, a lot of these wingers a lot of these gun center wings, they all have a very similar kind of base stat profile, because they all do that, what common wingers do nowadays in terms of bringing the ball up out of their own end to start a set and to kind of help out the forwards. Tupou is a great example of that. He was getting about 33 points a game in base just purely because of a lot of run meters. And obviously he had good tackle breaking ability as well, scoring a lot of tries too. And so I think no problem having him again to start the season, but I think he's just too expensive for me, but definitely going to be a good option. I think that's, going to be worthwhile to look out for and make sure that we can kind of jump on when he's maybe a little bit cheaper. Again, that's kind of the strategy that I'm going to go for. But yeah, again, pretty good option. You can't really go too wrong with an attacking player from the Roosters, to be honest. Lomax obviously was a SuperCoach darling, at least for me last season. I held him all the way through the season. I thought I was going to offload him once he'd made his money, but he was just so consistent and, a really, really good buy to have the start of the season. But I think for this year, he's obviously priced at his average of 68. He's priced at 605k. And compare that to when last year, I think he's starting around the 330k mark. It's kind of hard to justify that price. He obviously does, again, have pretty good base stats, and obviously with his goal kicking for the Dragons, that does, increase his scoring floor. So, his scoring floor was pretty decent. He was getting about 45 to 50 points a game, just from base and goal kicking. But yeah, again, for me, I think he's just too expensive to start the season, but someone, again, I'll be looking to, pick up later when he goes down in price. The Dragons, though, as well, they're just so I'm recording this on the day of the Charity Shield, and the Dragons just did not look good at all. So I just don't see how they're going to be scoring that many points anyway. So you could make the argument that his scoring potential is going to go down. So I would hope that if that does if that does happen, his price will go down enough that it's worthwhile for us to pick him up. Moving on, we've got Mansour at 595k. He's obviously now moved to the Rabbitohs from the Panthers, and again, one of those guys, similar mold to kind of like Nofoaluma and Tupou, does a lot of work out of his own end. He's got really good tackle breaking ability, so you can see that's kind of that's the bulk of their average in terms of how they get their points. I don't think that would change too much at the Rabbitohs, and the Rabbitohs have got an amazing amazing backline with the likes of Latrell, Cody Walker, Alex Johnson. So I think there's going to be plenty of points on offer if you're playing in the Rabbitohs backline. So I could easily see someone like Mansour, benefiting from that. Again, it's going to be a similar message. I think he's just too expensive for me to start the season, and so hopefully potentially his price does go down. He is a bit of a pod option. He's only owned by about 4% of the game at the moment, and he was someone I really wanted to get last season. But again, he was just, I could never stretch to him at any point during the season last year, and I think that probably did. Him and Nofoaluma really killed me at some points, but I had Lomax to carry me through. But yeah, again, can't discourage anyone from picking him. None of these guys are bad picks, let me just put it that way. But I think with these gun center wings, it's about timing them so that you can pick them up at their lower price and kind of pick them when they've got a set of good games to start the season. And the Rabbitohs do have some kind of a bit of a mixed bag. They've got the Storm and the Roosters in their first 3 games. So I think, good option, but maybe at some point later during the season. Bradman Best actually is really interesting. He is, again, very expensive compared to what he was last season. He was an amazing cash cow. 550k. He, again, does a lot of work with his base statistics. He's got really good running ability. Good thing that he does have in his favour is the Knights' early draw. The Knights have got a really good set of games to start the season. We've got the Bulldogs, the Warriors, Tigers, Dragons, Titans, and Sharks. That's an amazing first 6 games, and I think the only downside is that yes, they do have those easy games, but they might not have Ponga for half of those games. And Bradman Best, who plays on the left side for the Knights, he really benefited from having Ponga move attacking players going down the left side. So I think it's hard to say that they're going to be able to score as many points as they would without Ponga. I mean, I would expect, if I had to put my money on it, I would think that they're not going to score as many points without Ponga. He's their best player. So I think that it potentially is a limiting factor. I mean, if you really rate the Knight as a whole, as a team, I think you could go for him expecting that they're going to be, scoring some points and that Bradman Best is going to be involved in it. But again, it's one of those things where he's just a little bit expensive for me to start the season. And I think if there was Ponga in the team, I think he does become a little bit more of a serious consideration to start the season in my own mind. But without Ponga, I think it's hard for me to justify how I just don't know how that Knights team is going to perform. So I think Bradman Best will be a miss for me to start the season. But again, someone I'll be keeping an eye on. So up next, I've got Brighton To'o at 522k. I think out of this list of the kind of gun center wings, I think he would actually be the first one that I would really seriously considering have in my starting squad to begin the season. The thing is obviously priced cheaper than a lot of these other guys. He's also only about 4%, so he's a bit of a pod option. But he's playing with the Panthers side, who've got a really good opening start to the season. They've got the Cowboys, the Bulldogs, Storm, tough game, but then they've got the Sea Eagles, Raiders, and Broncos. So Storm and Raiders are tough, but Broncos, Bulldogs, Tigers, and Dragons in their first 6 games, I think is absolutely amazing. Brighton To'o, he's just one of those guys who's got a really solid work rate coming out of his own end. He just breaks tackles for fun, it's crazy. He's obviously, you can see he's scoring about 21 points a game on average from his tackle break, mainly from his tackle breaking ability. Combine that with his base, he's got a really solid floor of about 50 points a game. I could fully expect that if he does actually move over to the left side of the Panthers, given that Mansour's now gone to the Rabbitohs, because I think Charlie Staines would then move to the right wing where he scored all his buckload of tries. We'll get onto him later, spoiler alert. I think To'o on that left side, with Crichton, Luai. So I think To'o playing on that left side does make him even more appealing. And I think a combination of he's got a good start to the season with the Panthers. I really rate their backline and their attacking potential. So I think he'll be on the receiving end of a lot of tries and line breaks. Good base, good tackle breaking ability, not very highly owned. So it's a good pod option. I think the only thing is trying to fit him into your starting center wing, given that he is still expensive. That would be the only kind of negative I think you could argue for To'o, but I think really, really solid option, and one I'm really seriously considering having in my starting squad. And finally, in the kind of gun center wing category, I've got Val Holmes here. So he's only priced about 509k. Obviously, he seems to be pretty popular within this kind of category. He's owned by about 14% of the game. And it's one thing he does have in his locker is actually got a good variety of ways that he can score his points. Now, we've seen a bit of a trend with these other center wings where it seems to mainly be working out of their own end. So really having a really solid base with good tackle breaking ability. Obviously, Lomax is a bit of a difference to that in that he has goal kicking. And that's something that Val Holmes does have up his locker, is that he is a goal kicker for the Cowboys. So as you can see, that does aid into his scoring ability. So he doesn't have to solely just rely on tries. He can get his added bonus points just from goal kicking. His base is not as high as the other guys, but we saw at points during last season he can easily pop off like 90 plus, 100 plus score. He's definitely got that in him. And he's definitely more creative than these other guys. I think if he does play fullback, he would be really integral to how the Cowboys play and just how the modern fullback plays in terms of kind of being the man to throw the last ball before a try. It really helps them get their line break assists and try assists, and I think if you're playing that fullback role for the Cowboys, I could see him doing that for sure. The only thing with Val Holmes is that there's obviously, if it just comes down to this, if he plays at fullback for the Cowboys and we see that from round one, 100%, I think I'll have to really seriously consider him and get him into my team. But there has been talk from Todd Payton in terms of rotating some of the back line with like Scott Drinkwater playing at fullback at times, and I think Val Holmes being on the wing. If Val Holmes is on the wing, I don't think I'm going to be going for him, because then I think he doesn't have that added creative bonus that he would have if he was playing at fullback. So I think obviously his base might go up a little bit more if he was playing at wing, because then he might do more of that working out of his own end. He will still have his goal kicking. Potentially you could argue that he'd be scoring a little tries because he'd be on the end of them. But I think overall, if he plays at fullback, I think he's got that capability of getting like much bigger scores than say if he was just playing on the wing. So I think that's the real simple thing I'm just waiting to see with Val Holmes. If he plays at fullback from round one, I think I'll be getting him in. And if he's not, I think I'll have to give him a miss. Moving on, we're going on to kind of the mid-range category of centre wings. So I'll start with Brian Kelly. So he just crept under this price bracket. He's priced at about 499k. He's actually someone I'm really, really, really seriously considering having, because I think the Titans have just got an amazing start to the season. The Titans start with Warriors, Broncos, Cowboys, Raiders, Knights, and Sea Eagles. That's all in their first 6 games. So I think they've got a really good draw. They've got the potential to be scoring a lot of points. And I think towards the back end of last season, Brian Kelly was in a really amazing pod option. But I think he's got a really good base. You can see he's averaging about 30 points a game, which is pretty similar to the guys like Nofoaluma. Didn't have as much tackle breaking ability as, it's kind of some of the centers in the gun category. Some of that average is also factoring some injury affected games. I think I looked at his stats. At the games that he actually played like a full 80 minutes without any injury affected games, his average was actually 65. So I think he's probably priced a little bit lower than what his actual capability is. So I think there is good value in someone like Brian Kelly. If you don't want to quite stretch to like a Brian To'o or Val Holmes, I think for saving about another 20k, you can go to someone like Kelly, who I think will be a good pod option, and he's got a good combination of a good draw. He's probably priced a little bit under what his actual average should be, because he did have those injury affected games kind of, lowering his overall average. So I think he's going to be a really solid consideration for myself. I think someone like Brian Kelly I'd be really interested in having into my side at the start of the season. So moving on, we've got Stephen Crichton. I think probably a common thing that you're going to be seeing is that I'm probably going to be mentioning a lot of the Panthers backline, or any of their centre wings basically, because they have got a really good start to the season and they just performed so well last season in terms of attacking potential. So he had a good season last year. It was obviously a little bit cheaper, which may increase his appeal compared to say this year where he's priced at about 480k with an average of about 55. The thing is, I don't know if I see him really going above that average, because I think he went on an amazing try-scoring streak last season. I think that has really bumped up his average. But as you can see, his base average is just not quite the same as like To'o or Mansour when he was at the Panthers as well. So I think he was really heavily reliant on getting tries to really bump up his average. And the thing is, I think he's well capable of getting the same amount of tries as last season. But when he's priced at a higher price compared to when he was more value last season, that does kind of turn me off a little bit more. And for example, if I was trying to get someone from the Panthers backline, I would much rather have someone like To'o, who's about 40k more expensive, but he's just got higher base, better tackle breaking ability, which are more consistent things that I can rely on. So you just know that you're going to get more consistent output from Tupou, who doesn't have to rely as much on tries to get his points compared to someone like Crichton. I think when I'm paying close to 500k for a centre, I want to be knowing every week that I'm going to be getting about 55, 60 plus points a game. And he definitely could, but I think it's more dependent on him scoring tries than from him just from his work rate alone. I mean, he is a young kid. He obviously could improve in that regard, and that might be something that's been discussed over the off-season in terms of, getting him up more in terms of having his work rate. And without Mansour, I think obviously a lot of the other Panthers backline will have to pick up some of that slack. So I think he could actually then kind of, take up some of that workload, which could maybe then make him average closer to the 60-point mark. But yeah, that's something I will just keep in the back of my mind when picking someone like Crichton. I don't think I'm going to be going there myself, because if I was to go with the Panthers centre, who was a bit more expensive, I would be going with someone like Tupou, just for their consistency. So next I've got Jack Bird. So obviously Jack Bird is coming off some 2 serious injuries, so there's not really any recent stats on him. At 380k, he is dual listed, so you can actually pick him up in the second row as well if you'd want. I personally would advise against that, given that the second row is pretty valuable, and from all reports and what we saw in the game in the Charity Shield, Bird will be playing in the centres. Obviously he was training at some point, I think in the off season in the back row or in the middle. But I think he came out and said as well that he would prefer playing in the centres. That's where he feels most comfortable. If I had to bet, I think I would see him playing in the centres as well. Obviously, round 1 team list might change that. Because if he is playing in the second row, I think he definitely then becomes a lot more of an appealing option. Because then you'd expect him just to be getting a more consistent and higher base score than, say, if he was playing at the centres. But I think it's a big risk to go for someone who I think is coming off some serious injuries, and the Dragons overall, I don't see them performing that well as a team overall this season. Then would limit potentially his scoring output, because I'd expect maybe them not to be getting that many tries. So I think someone like Bird, he's obviously really popular. I think a lot of people have been really appealed by that dual flexibility and the potential that he will play in the middle, or in the back row, sorry. But personally for me, I don't think I'm going to be going there. There's a bit too much uncertainty in terms of how his body's going to hold up. Obviously, I'd hope that he continues to play and doesn't suffer any setbacks. But coming off those serious injuries, it takes, in my opinion, it takes a while for people to get back up to speed. So I think for him, I'm going to have a wait-and-see approach with him before maybe picking him up later in the season if I think that he's been performing well. Next up, Blake Ferguson. So Fergo. Mate, I had this guy at the start of last season and absolutely killed me. Didn't score for 17 games? Unbelievable. Again, I think 353k, he's pretty cheap for what we know that he can produce. And the thing is he's got amazing base stats. He's averaging about 30 points a game in pure base, with some tackle breaking potential as well. So I think with Fergo, you can expect to getting 35 points a game on just base alone, but it all depends if he can get his tries. If I had to bet, I'm going to bet that he'd score more tries than last season. So I think he could be a decent pod option, if you think, Fergo's going to have a good season and he's going to get a few more tries than he did last year. The Eels do have a good start to the season as well, which I think is going to be beneficial for someone like Ferguson. They've got the Broncos in their very first game, which is definitely going to be a good game. Storm after that, which is obviously going to be tough. But then they've got the Sharks, Tigers, Dragons, and Raiders. 3 out of those next 4 games are pretty good. The Raiders is obviously going to be a bit of a tougher game. So I think overall 4 out of their first 6 games are pretty winnable. And someone like Ferguson, if he just crosses over for a try or 2, you can see him getting into the 70-point average. So I think that obviously then makes him great value, because then he'd be making us some money to start the season. I don't know if I want to take the punt again. I got pretty burnt by that last season picking him. So I don't know, I've got a bit of scarring, I think, choosing Ferguson. Personally, I don't think I'm going to be going there to start the season, but I think he is a decent pod option, to start the season. He's a little bit expensive at 350 when there's a whole host of cheaper center wing options that we'll get to later. But if you want him to be your most expensive center and be a bit of a fun pod option, by all means go with Ferguson. Next I've got Jamayne Isaako. So I don't know how the Broncos are going to perform this season in comparison to last. Obviously you'd think it can only be better than last season. Last season was just absolutely woeful for the Broncos. He does have some advantages in that he goal kicks, especially when Tony Staggs is out, I think up until about round 8. So we know that Isaako is probably going to be the main goal kicker for the Broncos. His base stats just aren't there in terms of, even comparing to the likes of, say, Ferguson. So, yeah, and Isaako will be playing fullback. I think it's been confirmed that he's going to be playing at fullback. I think there was some discussion about Tesi Niu potentially being there, but I'm pretty sure Tesi Niu is either going to be in the centres or on the wing. So that does help with Isaako potentially can be a bit more creative in terms of chipping in for those kind of final pass plays where the fullback will link in with the rest of the back line. For me, I don't see myself going there. I don't know how the Broncos are going to perform. I don't really have too much faith in them scoring too many points. And I think there's plenty of better options who are cheaper than him or similar price, like, say, Ferguson. So, yeah, for me, probably going to be an avoid. So next up, I've got Reimis Smith, who'll be replacing Vunivalu at the Storm in the back line. 325k, it doesn't seem to be too bad of a price, to be getting a piece of the Storm attacking players. Obviously, you can see he's owned by about 11% of the game at the moment. I think, a lot of people will see that he's going to be starting in their back line, so you think that there's going to be a lot of attacking potential for him. He actually didn't have too bad of a base stat average of 26 a game. I think the thing for me is that it's just a bit unknown in terms of how he's going to perform in the Storm. And the things, I've never actually really been too appealed by Storm centres or wingers. Obviously, Adokar at times, can rack up 100 plus point, but that really depends if he just scores tries. Olam was okay towards the end of the season. I feel like always with the Storm centres, the points are always quite shared, so I think there's no real target man. Say, for example, Nofoaluma at the Tigers, 100%, he is their target man. He'll always be chipping in with tries. Whereas someone like Reimis Smith, we just don't know how he's going to perform in that Storm backline. I can see the appeal given that he's not too badly priced. Personally for me, I don't think I'm going to be going there because I think if I was to pay around that, I'd rather just kind of go down about 30k and start getting into the cheap cash cows, which we'll just now move on to. Alright, finally the cash cows in the centre wing position. I think this position definitely is always traditionally got the most cash cows, and I don't think that's any exception this year. There are a lot of good cheap options, and I've seen plenty of teams, and I don't think it's too bad of a strategy actually, running with 4 cheap centres so that you can spend the money elsewhere in your team. And given the wealth of options, I don't think that's actually too bad of an idea. Something I'm toying with as well. But we'll start off. We've got Charlie Staines at 298k. He's one of the most popular players, and you can see why. You just look at those average points and you're like, oh, what, 300k? Yeah, I'll take 112 points. Obviously he just had that ridiculous start to his NRL career where in the first 1.5 games he scored 6 tries, 5 tries, something like that. Unbelievable. So you can see why everyone jumped on him. Obviously his base stats were just nothing really nothing to be too proud of. I guess it's hard to be getting a lot of base stats when he kept running over for tries, right? So you can see obviously he was averaging about 51 points a game from scoring, and obviously a lot of evasive statistics probably from his line breaks and his tackle breaks. When paying 300k for a Panthers backline player, given what I mentioned with To'o in terms of the draw that the Panthers have got, and I think that I rate their Panthers attack, I think it's completely viable to have Charlie Staines be one of your starting centre wing positions. Obviously there's a bit of risk because we have only seen him for 1.5 games and we just don't know what he's actually going to average is more likely to be, right? But I think at that cheap of a price, it's fine to take the punt. It's not eating too much of your budget, and I think given that 53% of the players in the game do own him, there sometimes is a bit of that fear factor. You don't want to be missing out. So I think not too risky. You can put Charlie Staines in your team. He's definitely in my team, and I think you can't really go too wrong with that. Obviously, if we don't think he's performing, you can offload him later. Next up, we've got James Roberts. So he's now at the Tigers. He's priced pretty cheaply again at 278k. And actually, as you can see with all of these players, they're all very highly owned in comparison to some of the other centre options that I've presented. And I think that really does show that there is that focus on potentially having a very cheap centre wing position this season. As you can see, he obviously had an injury-affected season, which is kind of why he's been priced at where he is and why his average is at 35. In the past, we've seen him average around 60, 45, 42. I think that was his average in the last 3 years. So I think he does have the potential to be scoring above what he's actually priced at. So again, I think he's a fine cash cow option to have. We know what he can do. He's just gone through some issues and he's obviously had some injury problems as well. I think at 278k, again, not too much risk. It's fine to have him in your team. That's probably going to be a message I'm going to be saying a lot in this next little section. None of these guys are a risk to have given that they're all so cheap. So you can't really go too wrong with any of them. There are some that I might prefer a little bit more than others. Someone like Roberts I think is fine. I think I actually have him in my starting squad at the moment, but he could very easily fit in, if I wanted to kind of save money and downgrade one of my other centre wings. Next we've got David Fusitu'a at 250k, a little bit less owned, and about 15% of the game at the time that I put this together. Again, I'm not really going to add too much in terms of like commentary on these guys. I think the Warriors, obviously, I think they're a very hard team to predict at times, given that on their day they can beat anyone, but so many times they just put in absolute stinkers of performance. And so I think Fusitu'a is going to sometimes be a bit of a victim of that, in terms of that unpredictability, in terms of his points. His base stats, again, none of these guys really have stellar base stats. I think for these guys it all depends on if they can get tries, boost up their average. But I think, when they're all priced around scoring around 28 to 30 points, all of these guys, I think you could potentially say that they might going to get into the 35 and 40 point mark. So I think they could all be, valid cash cow options. And Fusitu'a is just another example of that. So yeah, moving on, we've got Jason Saab, who will be playing on the wing for the Manly Sea Eagles. Again, not too much to add, same with, say, Fusitu'a. I think at 233k is a good cheap option to be putting into your centre wing. He was averaging about 29 points a game, only about 20 from base, which is not great. But a lot of these guys are young kids, and so you'd expect them hopefully to be, as they continue to develop, they do a bit more of that kind of workload and coming out of their own end, which might uptick their base stats a little bit. So hopefully if he does that, then he will be averaging closer to, say, the 35 to 40 point mark, and then he'll be making us some, maybe about 100k, and then we can offload him later on to either a gun or downgrade him to enough to take that profit, basically. The Sea Eagles draw to start the season isn't great. They've got the Roosters, Rabbitohs, Dragons, which is a good game, and the Panthers in their first four, then the Warriors and the Titans. So I think, one could make the argument that you didn't want to have your team to start the season. I think that's completely valid. You'd expect potentially that Manly don't do too well in those tough games, and then maybe his price even drops even further, and then you could pick him up even at an even cheaper price, So I think he potentially, given that there is a tough start to the season, I think you could then potentially just say, I'm just going to wait and see how the Sea Eagles go, and then I can pick him up later, say in round 3, just before any price changes occur, if he has actually performed pretty well. Tesi Niu, again, similar price. He is more popular than Saab, I think, because of that early preseason talk that he might have been playing at fullback. But I do have a feeling that he will be playing either in the centre or the wing, like potentially occupying Tony Stagg's centre position. But at 233k, again, not too much risk. He did play a few games at fullback last season for the Broncos, and in those games he was averaging pretty decent base of he was getting 27, 34 and 21 points in base in those 3 games that he played at fullback. And played the full 80 minutes. So that's pretty decent base, and that's already getting him above his average points that he's priced at. So I could expect him to actually be a pretty decent cash go option. If you throw in the occasional try, then I think he'll be an even better cash go option. So I think Tesi Niu, I'd probably prefer him over someone like Jason Saab, to be honest, given that he does have probably a little bit more base points potential. But yeah, I think you can't really go too wrong with him. He's going to be a super popular pick. As you can see, 40% of the game currently own him, and I can't talk anyone really out of getting him. Next up, Daine Laurie, he's recently moved from the Panthers to the Tigers, and potentially he could be in the running to be getting their number 1 position at the Tigers. I think the talk is either that he's going to be in the number 1 or potentially in the number 14 utility role. Again, 223k. He's so cheap that I think it's fine to have someone like him, even if he's just on your bench. You don't have to even be playing him. You're just getting him in purely for his cash cow potential. I think everyone is really, really hoping, though, that he does get that number 1 spot at the Tigers, because he did play 1 game at fullback last year for the Panthers, and in that game he scored 71 points and he got 45 points in just base stats, which is absolutely amazing. So if we know that he's getting that number 1 spot and he can average something similar to that, he's going to be scoring well above his average that he's priced at, and he's going to be an amazing cash cow. He does also have dual flexibility in that you can put him at fullback position as well. Again, I wouldn't recommend putting him at fullback, given I think you'd want to have 2 guns at fullback. But I think, yeah, if we find out in the round 1 team lists that he's going to be in the starting fullback position, I think he's close to a must in your centre wing, even on your bench, just purely for the cash cow potential. And finally, we've got Bailey Simonsson from the Raiders. So he'll be taking over Nick Kotrick's vacant wing spot at the Raiders, and 205k, so he's even cheaper than these other guys. I think he'll be a pretty popular cheapie that we'll see in a lot of teams, and I can completely understand why. He did play a few games for the Raiders last season as well, and when he was playing on the wing, I'm just looking at his numbers now, he had base stats of 28, 26, 23 and 25, which is actually not that bad. So obviously his base here that I've got is probably a little bit down because of some other games where he wasn't playing full 80 minutes. But if he's already matching that average that he's priced at just in base alone, and the Raiders do have a pretty good 4-game stretch to start the season. They've got the Tigers, the Sharks, the Warriors and the Titans, so all very winnable games. So I think he's going to be a great cash cow option to have as well, given that if he is expected to play 80 minutes in base stats alone, he will meet his current average. Plus throw in the potential for tries, he'll go well above his average and he'll be a great cash cow option. So I think he's definitely someone to have either in your starting 4 or potentially on your bench. But yeah, so I think Simonsson, really solid option with really great cash cow potential. So I'd be definitely looking to get him into your SuperCoach sides. And finally, I've just got this little extra addition where there are going to be some cash cow cheapies, I think, that we know are not going to be playing at the start of the season, but are potentially ones that we can keep an eye on for later in the season if we do want to be jumping on some cheap cash cow options later in the season. So starting off, we've got Max Feagai. So I think the reason I had originally got him was that if Jack Bird was touted to be playing in that back row or lock position, then Feagai was going to be taking that centre spot. But given that I think that Jack Bird is going to be playing in that centre wing position, Feagai, then it just becomes a wait and see. I don't expect him to be in the starting 17 for the Dragons. So I think I wouldn't be getting him into your side, given that he is 203k. You pay 2k more and you can get Bailey Simonsson. So I think someone just to keep an eye on, but don't get him in really into your starting SuperCoach team. And then Hayes Dunster at the Eels. So I think the running was for Jennings' centre spot. It was either between himself and Opicic, but I believe Opicic is the one who's actually won that position. So I don't expect Hayes Dunster to be featuring for the Eels to begin the season, but he's again someone to keep an eye on, in case one of the Eels backline players does go down with an injury. Someone like Hayes Dunster I think could then fill in. So I think, someone just to keep an eye on, and potentially during the season we might see him pop up into the Eel side. And if some part during the season you're looking to save money or potentially get another cash cow into your team, someone like Hayes Dunster, could be an option. And finally, the Swali, the one who everyone's been, hearing all the hype and news about. He's similar to Dunster in that he's not going to be playing at the start of the season for the Roosters. I think the Roosters are pretty keen to get him eligible to play at some point during the season, though. Obviously, they'll have some of their backline players probably play for New South Wales in Origin, which then does open the option potentially for someone like Swali to play. I feel like they just want to be getting some kind of NRL first grade experience for him this season before they fully introduce him, say, into the starting side in a couple of years. So I think just keep an eye out on Swali if he does actually, at some point be able to be eligible to play for the Roosters in first grade. So I think, just keep an ear out for when he potentially might be playing for the Roosters, and he'll be a great cash cow option then, or someone that you can just, use as a way to trying to save money, downgrading a player to a basement dollar player. Alright guys, that's it. We made it to the end of the video. It's a bit different in terms of the centers. I think the amount of cheapie and good mid-range options means I think there is less appeal to be going for gun centers. I think it all really depends on your kind of strategy and if you want to be running with a gun center or if you're happy to go cheap in center wing. I'd definitely be keen to hear what you guys think in the comments below. And if there's any players that I might have missed, I'm really keen to hear as well in the comments. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video and got some value out of it, would really appreciate a thumbs up and a like on the video. And if you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, would really appreciate that too. I think we're almost close to 100 subscribers, which is obviously in YouTube land is not a lot. But I think for me, who's just starting, I think getting to 100 subs is a great milestone, and I really appreciate the support. So, if you guys are really interested in seeing more content like this, I'll be continuing to do that throughout the season. Until then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.